So last week, it was kind of hard to figure out with our conversation that we had, but we actually kicked off a new series. It's called On Broadway. And if you were here last week, the choir sang a song that was a Broadway musical song. And then this week, they sang one from Oliver, which was fantastic. And so the goal is to kind of take some of these songs that we hear in musicals and kind of intersect them with moments of our life and our faith. Because there's a lot that we can find in the world that has a good tie-in to what we do as a people of God. So we're going to talk about, any ideas? Jesus. We're talking about Jesus. But we're also talking about food. Very good. See, context clues help. So I don't know what happens in your house. If you have kids in your house, if you have been in a family, if you had kids once and now get grandchildren, there's a certain phrase that I hear a lot. And it usually goes, "Mom, I'm hungry." Yeah, or "I'm starving." And it's not just a casual, "Mom, I'm hungry. Would you please give me some food?" I mean, it is literally like death is near. Like, "Mom, I'm hungry. I'm starving, I can't make it." And usually I'm not going to get on the floor because that would be awkward. But usually it involves, I look in the living room and half the time both my children are on the floor and they're just laying there flat as can be. I'm like, are you near death because you've not eaten in the last 20 minutes? I think so. But I don't know what happens in yours, but I feed my children all day long. You never know that I feed my children all day long with their reactions. We send them to friends and family members' house to either spend the day or the night, and one of the first comments we always get back, but besides they never stop, is they eat all the time. I know, I promise you, they're only 6 and 8, but I promise you we feed our children. And then I hear stories from you that have had teenagers, and I am terrified of when they get to those years. I mean, they eat me out of house and home now. I'm not going to have anything but our foundation left by the time they hit, 13 and 14. So those are just some of my fears. But that being said, we like food. Well, stop. I like food. I don't know about y'all. I exercise so I can eat. Yeah, so we got some hands in the back that food is good. Food is glorious. Food, right? So when you run, just a caveat, when you run 26 miles, you can eat a lot of food after that. Just a pitch, just to throw that out there for you. But food is important. We all need food to survive, and eating the right food is crucial for our health. Food gives us energy for everything that we do throughout the day. It gives our body what it needs to repair muscles, to repair organs, and to keep our skin healthy. Food also can help us fight off some dangerous diseases. And just like we hunger for food, we also hunger for things that aren't food. See, hunger is a strong craving for something. And so like we have a strong craving for food, mine happens to be ice cream, we also tend to have a strong craving for other things in life. We crave attention. We crave relationships. We crave love and affection. We crave acceptance, meaning, and purpose. We crave success. Some of us crave fame and fortune. Others crave that perfect family who lives in a perfect house that's never messy or broken. That would be fantastic, by the way. We crave these things in life because we are hungry for something. We just oftentimes don't know what that something is. And when our hunger and cravings, what happens is they lead us to seek satisfaction in all the wrong places. We even write songs, "I found love in all the wrong places." So we try to satisfy our hunger with things that will never work. Things that at the end of the day often leave us even more hungry than when we started. And if you're thinking, man, that sounds kind of familiar, we talked about this idea a couple weeks ago when we looked at the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. She was thirsting after everything that would not satisfy until she met Jesus. And I find it interesting that John, the writer of our gospel story that we're going to look at this morning, he kind of has this theme We looked at John 4 a couple weeks ago, and we're going to look at John 6 this morning. And he has this theme in these couple chapters of craving and seeking satisfaction. And it's this idea of not filling our lives with things that aren't necessary, but making sure we fill our lives with things that are lasting and important. And I love that this idea is highlighted in these two stories and in these chapters, because it's this idea that when we are deficient, Jesus is sufficient. You see, when we have nothing left, when we are empty, starving, and craving the first thing we can find, Jesus steps in and is there and provides exactly what we need in that moment. Because when we are deficient, he will always be sufficient. And so our scripture comes from the Gospel of John this morning. And now a few things about this gospel that you need to know. It's a letter written by John. Hence the name, the Gospel of John. Right. So John was one of Jesus' disciples. So this means that he spent an incredible amount of time with Jesus. He was there when Jesus walked on water. He was there when Jesus healed the sick and took mud and made a blind guy see again. John was there when Jesus taught the masses. He was there when Jesus rode into town on a donkey. John sat beside Jesus in the upper room, where he told his disciples that soon his body would be broken and his blood would be shed. And John was there in the crowd that day as he watched Jesus take his last breath on the cross. So John's purpose in writing this gospel, this good news, is stated in the end of his letter. He said in John 20:31, but all of these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. You see, John was someone who understood that Jesus was more than a prophet. He was more than a miracle man. He was more than what people saw on the surface. John understood that the claims made about Jesus being the Messiah weren't just claims, they were the truth. And it is because of the impact that Jesus had on John's life that he lived the remainder of his days sharing the good news with others so that they might believe that Jesus was the Messiah and live their life to the fullest. And so this is kind of the urgency that he writes this letter. This is the urgency that we see in the story of the woman at the well and the story that we're going to hear this morning. This urgency to not get caught up in things that won't satisfy and fill us, but satisfy and fill by Jesus. So we start at 6:25. Not the time, but verse 25 of chapter 6. Just don't want you to be confused. So Jesus is with his disciples and the crowd has begun to gather around them. And this was the same crowd that a day before saw Jesus take a Lunchable and feed 5,000 people. And they were amazed by this. And I would be too. And I would also ask Jesus, where can I get a Lunchable that multiplies like that? Because I go through them a lot in my house. So they see him and they're curious and they want more of what they just saw. And so they follow Jesus around the Sea of Galilee and to another hillside. Verse 25 says, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. So as we can see, the people have followed Jesus across the lake, but Jesus is kind of on to them. He recognizes that they only follow because of the miracles that he did the day before, and they only want their bellies filled with food again. I admitted I probably would do the same. But I love his response. He says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that will endure. Don't waste your time on food that's not going to help you. Don't waste your time on food that's not good for you. Don't waste your time on food that is detrimental to your health and your success. Don't do things that won't last. Do things that will endure. So they asked him, Pause. We're going to try that again. What must we do to do the works that God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this. So the work of God isn't this long list that we like to create of, I've done this, Jesus, I've done this, I go to church, I read my Bible, I do this, I do all these things. Jesus says, it's not this list, this magical list that you have in your head that you create. The work of God is this, to believe in the one that he has sent. So they ask him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What are you going to do, Jesus? You see, our ancestors, they ate manna in the desert, and as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. And I realize there are no dumb questions in life. I get it. Most questions are good questions, but this is a dumb question they ask him. And it's a dumb question because they're saying, we want you to prove that you are the Son of God. So do a sign for us so that we can believe you. Completely forget the fact that they just saw one a day before. He fed 5,000 plus people with a Lunchable. That's pretty impressive. Any of you seen 5,000 fed by a Lunchable? No, me neither. I really want to, though. And not only did he feed 5,000, but he had enough food left over to fill 12 baskets. So they'd already seen a miracle. And so they're asking him this question, and it's kind of like, what more do you want? So then Jesus, just in case they were unsure of what kind of food, they said, look, there's this manna that our ancestors got in the past. Do something like that. So he said to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven. It wasn't Moses who created that. It wasn't Moses the one that got the manna and gave it to you all. But it was my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. I still don't get it. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. And whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never thirst. You see, Jesus turns it back on them. He says, look, Moses had nothing to do with this. It was God and God alone that gave them the manna. And it isn't until Jesus declares that I am the bread of life that we can begin to kind of see their eyes open and begin to live differently because of it. And I think this is how we should live, because when we understand that Jesus is the bread of life, that he can satisfy the cravings that we need, that he can be sufficient for us in our life when we are deficient, I think we begin to live differently. We begin to do things differently because we are filled with what Jesus has to offer. I get really grouchy when I don't have food. Anybody else? I'm like a living Snickers commercial. I go from like Oscar the Grouch to like Sweet and Precious Megan. It's really kind of nice. It's the way I should be all the time. I mean, I think I need to add like a button to my body that when I get hungry, I push it and it has this disclaimer of, I am sorry immediately for anything I'm going to say to you. But what happens is when I get food after that, I'm different. I behave differently because I have been satisfied. And as followers of Jesus, you and I, who claim to follow the bread of life and be filled by the bread of life and have this overflowing fountain of the living water inside of us, we shouldn't walk around grouchy. We shouldn't walk around as if we are holding everything inside. It should be so much inside of us that it's like oozing out. That we should have breadcrumbs falling off as we walk because we are so filled with Jesus and we're going to share that with other people. When we are filled with the bread of life, our behaviors change. Our lives change and our actions change. Because it no longer is about me and getting my fill. It becomes about you and doing everything I can that you get yours. When we no longer need to crave after all those things that we used to crave and no longer seek out false satisfaction to be filled, we seek the bread of life and know that he alone is sufficient and will have more than enough. And then we are to take the rest of it and help others see. So I need to offer a little bit of honesty with you this morning. There was a tension as I was preparing the sermon, because the two themes of the water of life and the bread of life are very similar. And so there was this thought of, do I just give you the same sermon to see if anybody noticed? That was a joke. You can laugh. I wasn't really being serious. But we kind of had a struggle to how are we going to end this? Because again, it's a similar fill me up, satisfy me type of sermon. And so I was talking with Aaron, and we decided that maybe a Q&A might be better, because the ending of this needs to shift a little bit. Because we understand that we have the water of life inside of us. We understand that we have the bread of life inside of us. So now what? And so in our conversation, I just said, so what? So what? Jesus is the bread of life. And we decided that, you know what, maybe this should be a conversation between the two of us. So, Aaron, so what?
Yeah, so obviously the first place to hear that is if you're here, you're kind of already leaning into that message, or someone bribed you or kidnapped you and brought you here. And if you don't know or have a relationship with Jesus, then I hope that you're hearing today that Jesus is the bread of life and can satisfy your deepest spiritual longings.
Yep.
That's the first so what. The second so what, though, has to do with our mission. And that is that if you're already here, you may already know that, and you may be like, that's great. We love that Jesus is the bread of life. We want everybody to partake and be satisfied. But what do we do with that? Like, what do I do with the knowledge that Jesus is the bread of life? And I think this is really the heart of the question for many of us today, because we no longer live in a culture that wants to hear about Jesus as the bread of life, or even wants to eat, if you will, the bread of life.
Right.
I think of it as we're building steakhouses in the land of vegetarians. All right?
Okay. Say that again.
That was fun.
Say that again.
We're building steakhouses in the land of vegetarians, right? And so it's a whole mindset change. And of course, if you know a vegetarian, or if you are one, you're very anti-meat, right? And maybe you're one that doesn't care if other people eat meat, but I know vegetarians who are like adamant that all of us who eat meat are going to hell, right? I mean, if there is a hell, we're going there, right? And we're in a culture now that is similar in the sense of it's no longer okay to go to church. Like, we're anti-church.
Yeah.
We're anti the message of Jesus. And there's a litany of reasons for that. Some of them good, some of them we've caused, like
right.
by our poor behavior.
Yep.
But when we talk about what it means for Jesus to be the bread of life, the place that I think is interesting is that we now have to see ourselves as people who aren't handing out Jesus as the bread of life, but are rather communicating a message that helps people become aware that they're hungry.
Yeah.
Like, we are so anti-God in our culture that we don't even know we're hungry. And we can fill our lives and our bellies up with all kinds of beeping machines and computer images and YouTube videos and phone calls and successes at work. And it's like a kid who grew up in a candy store and never has any idea what it means to eat anything but junk food.
Yeah.
And it's rotting away his teeth and it's rotting away his soul. And our message has to become different in the sense that the delivery is different. Not the message, but the delivery has to be different in the sense that we have to help people become aware that they're spiritually hungry.
Yeah, and so we had talked about what this looks like for a church and as a body of believers, and we kind of came to 4 different conclusions of what a typical pattern of a church might look like. So there's 3 not negative, but negative churches, and then there's 1 healthy. And so can you outline for us what those look like?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to do that would be to have 4 volunteers come up. Do anybody just willing to come up and be like a poster child on stage with us? We need 4 of you. Come on. Don't be scared.
We have nothing for you other than a high five.
An entire room full of introverts right here.
It's my people.
1, 2, 3. We need 1 more. Come on. There we go. All right. So let's back this up just a little bit. So if you just stand 1, 2, 3, 4, that'll be helpful. You have no idea what it means where you're standing, so it's okay. So I want to be clear, if you'll stand right here, I'm not saying this about you. but I'm just using you as a picture, okay? So this doesn't necessarily represent you, but I want you to embody, all right, this image. All right, we'll start with the first church. There's 3 dysfunctional models that I think of when I think of churches, but I want you to hear not just churches, but individuals, okay? And over here we have the first model. All right, you're a big dude, so this works out. All right, who wants to force feed you Jesus whether you want it or not? You're getting the bread of life whether you want it or not. All right, and so I kind of think of a fighting pose a little bit. Can you give us a good fight? There. Ooh, I'm intimidated. I'm going to stand over here. And so your message is, I'm going to force feed you Jesus whether you want it or not. Right, very good. And you're the guy like on the street who's like grabbing people and scaring them. Like, do you know where you would go if you died today? And everybody's like, whoa, I probably to a funeral home. That's where we could, I mean, I don't know. And again, it's intimidating. And you have a good heart. Like, you want people to know Jesus, but you're just shoving it down their throat. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about, you're going to bring it back to Jesus. And I was like, well, I was talking about my dog dying and where we should bury him. Well, did you know that Jesus can raise your soul from hell too? And you're like, whoa, dude, like, let's stay with my dog where we're going to bury him, right? All right, so you're shoving Jesus down people's throat. And that's the first unhealthy model. Now, just pause. Let me see the stance again. Come on, there it is. Whew. All right, this guy actually does like physical training, so don't mess with him here. This is a good fighting stance. All right. Anybody know a church or an individual that's like this? Like, that's so zealous, they're like offensive. Like, okay, I see a few hands, some of you nodding your head. Good. All right. So you can come back to that or hold that, whatever you want to do. You just stand there and continue to look good, though. All right, don't intimidate this guy. All right. Now, the next church over here, all right, is the church that thinks they got to protect Jesus. All right, and that is that the body of Christ, the bread that's out there for you, we've got to set up rules to protect Jesus, to make sure you don't taint it, to make sure that you don't get in and mess it up. And so I think of someone who's doing this, like, you know, you're stopping people. All right, that is very, I mean, this is intimidating. You're supposed to be intimidating, dude. Yeah. You don't work on the street crew, do you? That's good, because you will get run over. All right. And so here's the guy that's stopping people from coming to know like Jesus. And you've got all these rules and all these regulations. And we've talked the last 3 weeks about the little r versus the big R. The regulations and the rules we call religion versus the big R, which we call relationship. Okay? And so you've got rules that actually keep people from getting to know Jesus. Like, hey, you got to give that up before you come to know Jesus. You got to stop doing that. You can't behave that way. And they have all these rules, and eventually the world knows more about what we stand against than what we stand for. And I can't get to Jesus because you keep telling me another rule I got to live by before I get to Jesus. And so you're stopping me from getting to Jesus because you're afraid I'm going to harm the bread. You know any churches with rules and rules and rules that at the end of the day people don't ever want to get to know Jesus because of the church? Or, shh. Or individuals. Again, you know any individuals that like, hey, they just got so many rules and regulations that people don't get to know Jesus. Okay, so again, like this good-looking guy here, you're a good-looking guy. You can continue to hold that pose. If you get tired, you can relax a little bit and come back to it. Okay, we want to get the third picture. All right, I don't know your name. Thad. Okay, and you're related to that lady right there, right? Yep. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Move on anyways. All right. So Thad, you're my third dysfunctional church, and you're making like a stew. And so if you can just be here stirring the pot, and I just want you to imagine you got this big old pot right here, and what you're doing is you're throwing everything in there. Okay? Here's the bread of life. Here's the sausage of Buddhism. Here's a Hindu chunk. And here's some Islam. And it doesn't matter. You can be an atheist. You can be a Wiccan. And basically every worldview possible you've thrown in here. Because, look, let's just not be offensive. Right? Let's not hurt anyone's feelings. Let's not make any claims. Let's not stand out. And your goal is just to make everybody happy. Why can't we get along anyways? And again, as long as everybody agrees with you, it's okay, right? The minute they don't agree, then hold on, that's a problem. But as long as we agree with you and everything ends up the same, everything gets you to Jesus, the problem is that your chunks of Jesus you threw in here, they don't mix. Jesus refuses to be mixed with anything else, because he makes these audacious claims. I am the only. And the stew church, the stew religion, the stew worldview wants to go, now Jesus, come on, you don't really mean that. I mean, what you mean is you're one of the many, and it's okay to believe in this and this and this because we all end up at the same place, right? That's what you really meant to say. And you want to go back and like edit out some of those parts, which, yeah, snip them out, which in fact some other religions do. We were down in Atlanta, Megan and I and a couple of our church leaders down in Atlanta last week, and we stayed in a hotel, and the owner of the hotel was a Buddhist, and as all good Buddhists, he was trying to explain to me how our gods are the same and how Jesus fit in right with all the stuff that he believed. And I just stared at him thinking, you haven't studied Jesus very well, because Jesus refuses to be mixed in. It can't happen. So we have, again, kind of violent, in your face, shoving Jesus down your throat. You're going to eat the bread of life whether you like it or not. We have another individual or church that says, stop, you aren't good enough, you got to get cleaned up first, you got to get your act together. You cannot take liquids into the sanctuary. Right? Because that's like right next to murder is if you dump something on the carpet, right? Because you're going to hell then, right? And again, we just have all these rules, and people can't come to know Jesus and allow the bread of life to fill them and change them because we stop them from getting to Jesus. You're doing an excellent job. I don't care what he said about you. And over here we got Mr. Stu who's saying, hey, everything's good. Just throw it all in. Just we mix it together as long as we're all happy. Again, I'm not offended, you're not offended, and as long as you believe what I believe, then we can get along. Right? We just throw it all in and mix it together. So do you have these three pictures in mind? Okay, so stay right there 1 second, guys.
So again, we don't want to be one of those, because if we have the bread of life inside of us, that's not what I want to look like as an individual, as a follower, nor as a church. So what does the alternative look like?
Yeah, and before we get to the alternative, I think what's important to recognize, do any of these create a hunger? Like, do you know anybody who looks at you or the church when we act like this and go, man, I am hungry for what you got? Anybody? I don't know anybody like that, right? And if they are, I don't want them in the church because they're loony, right? They need like counseling and stuff before they come to know Jesus or as they come to know Jesus, right? Because if I'm shoving Jesus down your throat violently, I'm not going, man, I'm spiritually hungry. I want to know this God that you got, right? That's not the way it works. So none of these create a spiritual hunger. You chose wisely. Okay? I mean, great job. High five. All right?
So can I just pause here?
What?
Just notice that the women picked a good spot. Just throwing that out there. I'm gonna let it ride just for a brief moment. Okay, go ahead. Continue on.
Great. All right, so over here is kind of a healthy model for the church. Okay, and again, I was thinking of some different images, like we could rub our belly, which I don't think would really help because I don't know anybody who knows, you're hungry. I think people go, hey, your stomach hurt or what's going on? All right, but I was thinking of what it means to say that we're not shoving Jesus down your throat. We're not preventing you from knowing Jesus. We're not trying to mix Jesus. We're actually here to care for you. There you go. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, hands out, either a hug or kind of service, right? I'm here to serve. I'm here to care for you. I'm here to love on you, all right? And here's just what I'm thinking. Like, if I want you to know that you're spiritually hungry, but you're not aware of that, the only way to do that is to do what Jesus said to do, which was to love. In fact, he says it, love one. We'll try it again. It was a little slow there. Jesus says to love one another, right? And then in 1 Corinthians 13, we have this list of what it means to love one another. But like, what would it mean that you live in such a way that people go, I want what you have? Again, they're anti-Jesus. They can be anti-church, but they can't deny the fact that you are caring for the community. And so we've been working on a new kind of phrase that we stole and adapted, and it's called For Fairborn. And what would it mean if people looked at our church and said, that's the church that's for Fairborn? Like, That's the church that is transforming our community. That's the church that is just doing amazing ministry. And they don't even have to talk about Jesus. Why? Because we're just for Fairborn. And eventually as people go, why? You can begin to go, because my Jesus is for Fairborn and for you. You see, our works, just as Jesus fed the 5,000, give us the platform to be able to stand on and speak to someone eventually. Now, does that happen immediately? No. Like, I don't immediately care for you and you go, yeah, I want to know Jesus. Usually that's like 100 times of interaction where I've said, I'm for Fairborn, I'm for you, before you go, what does that mean? Like, I finally trust you enough that you're not putting on some show, you're not putting on a hoax, you literally do care. You're crazy. What does that mean? Now, here's are you afraid of any of these dudes? All right, so here's what I want to see. I just think, what if we were for Fairborn and we would transform the world and help them become aware of their hunger? And so here you are, hands out, ready? And I know you're okay with this. If your husband was up here, probably not. But all right, let's just ready. Go into your poses, guys. There you go. Now, would you just take a moment and give him a hug? Now, look, stop. He can't make stew when he's getting a hug, can he? Isn't that beautiful? All right, go, keep going. Now your hands are out. Now you're transformed. Look, he can't stop people when he's getting a hug. Isn't that beautiful? All right. Is somebody getting pictures of this? This is really cool.
It's not me. I don't know.
All right, and I don't know if I would have hugged that dude. He was like going to punch you. But again, he can't be violent, shoving Jesus down people's throat if he's getting the hug. If we are for Fairborn, see, we disarm you. We disarm our culture. Because again, they can hate Jesus, they can hate our message, they can hate the church, and they've got 1,000 reasons why, and many of them are legitimate reasons that you and I go, I wouldn't like me either. Right? But the minute we love our community in such a way that they go, I can't speak against that. And again, 100 interactions, suddenly they go, what does it mean to be for Fairborn? It transforms everybody. Hey, give them a big hand. Thank you, guys.
You know what I like about this idea of being for, there's not much in it anyway, of being for is there's no strings attached. None. I am for you because Jesus is for me. I'm not seeking relationships and friendship with you because of what I can get from you. But when we become a church that says we are for you because we have been called to go and make disciples, to be in the world, and to share the bread that we have, we are going to love you as you are. Because we are for you, because Jesus is for us.
Yeah, I gave this challenge to our Friday morning group that I meet with, and I said to them, so in our interactions with others, if we're going to think about helping people become aware of their spiritual hunger, some of how we interact has to change. The message isn't different, but the delivery.
Right.
The delivery has to be different. And it was funny because the one guy said, he goes, I think I can say this in church. My wife will let me know later if I can. He goes, so I have to stop being a prick to my boss? And I was like, yeah, I think that's probably like, you're never going to build a platform to talk to someone if you behave in such a way that he walks away every time going, what a jerk.
Yeah.
Right? And again, how we behave. And so here's the question that we have for you is like, if you're for Fairborn and for an individual, how does your interaction with them need to change so that they become aware of a spiritual hunger? Like, how do you help someone become hungry? And you've talked about this already. Like, you smell something, like bread, or you were talking about ice cream, which, but then I become hungry, right? And so how do we put off the aroma of Jesus' love so that people are next to us and like their stomach's just turning? Again,
so we're like
in a
internal,
spiritual sense.
we're like bakeries.
We're internal bakeries. We are delivery men.
That's right.
We're the bread man and bread woman.
Yeah. But I like bakeries too because I'm all about sugar. For the records, not gonna lie. you have cookies, bacon, and I can smell that. And
So
it makes me want that.
So this for Fairborn idea, everybody see the image up here? we're working on making this a big deal. In fact, we got a sermon series coming up that's going to bring all this, and you're going to go, okay, I'm well aware of what For Fairborn is. So we're kind of teasing the idea out for you a little bit, but we're like going to make up shirts and onesies.
So when you have a baby, you can get a For Fairborn onesie.
How cool is that?
And the reason is...
And if you don't have a baby, you can give one away.
That's right.
They're not adult size, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's just move beyond that thought process. And again, we're going to share this a little bit more in a couple more weeks. But this idea is that when people see us in the community, they know what we're for, because we're for them. And so, literally, we're going to plaster this on everything we can, because we want people to know who we are as a church and what we stand for, not what we stand against.
Because we all know what people think the church stands against, right? And we have this list of phobias and this list of why we're out to get people. And again, what we want to know is how can we change our interaction with the culture so that they know what the church is for. And if people thought of our church and immediately said, I know that church, they're for Fairborn. I know that individual, they're for Fairborn. Therefore, they're for
see what you did
me.
there.
How cool would that be? And then we begin to get the reputation of Jesus.
So what I would like you to do whenever you speak online about something that happens in this community, I want you to start using the hashtag For Fairborn. And we're just going to see what happens. Because it is my belief that when we begin to live as people who have the bread of life inside of us, and we begin to live for others, God's going to take on the rest. And He's going to make changes that we never saw coming and never thought possible. And I know it's online, and people are like, can we really make a difference? This is where I live. And I promise you, lives are changed because of what people see on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. I promise you. So if you would, just begin using the hashtag For Fairborn on things within our community, and especially as things that we do within a church. And I would love to come back in 6 months and tell you of all the lives that have been changed because of that. Can you do that? And may we go in the grace and the love of our Lord Jesus Christ, who calls us to be bread deliverers into the world, and to show our community that we are for them because Jesus is for us. Go in peace. Amen.